There are films that wash over you, leaving only impressions, and then there are those rare sci-fi works that seem to press against the edges of your awareness quietly, subtly until you're no longer certain where the film ends and your perception begins. These weren't obscure experiments screened in forgotten corners of art house theaters. They were legitimate releases, available on VHS shelves, broadcast late at night, streamed casually by viewers with no expectation of anything unusual. Yet many walked away, sensing they had been changed in ways that didn't match the simplicity of sitting through a movie. Some described a gentle warping of time, scenes that felt shorter than they should have been, or sequences that seemed to stretch into a soft, unmeasurable space. Others found themselves slipping into déjà vu during the viewing, recognizing moments they had no memory of ever encountering. A few reported dreams that echoed the film's visual language with eerie precision. Even more unsettling were those who insisted they forgot entire sections of the film during their first watch, only to discover them upon revisiting. Experts attempted to reduce these accounts to technical quirks, low-frequency drones affecting spatial awareness, analog projection artifacts stimulating peripheral hallucinations, color grading that nudged emotional processing, but such explanations failed to address the most perplexing pattern. The strange effects were tied almost exclusively to earlier releases, initial prints, early broadcasts, unpolished transfers. When the same titles resurfaced in restored versions, cleansed and sharpened for modern screens, the phenomena seemed to vanish. What remained was a growing suspicion, perhaps something in the imperfections, those unrepeatable textures, those unstable audio layers created a doorway of sorts, allowing the film to touch the mind more directly than intended. Tonight, we examine 15 sci-fi films reported to have altered the consciousness of those who first encountered them. Whether through accident, forgotten technique, or something stranger, these movies left traces long after their images faded. If you choose to revisit them, pay attention not to what you see, but to what shifts inside you. 1. Stalker, 1979. Among all films whispered to have altered consciousness, Stalker remains one of the most quietly transformative. Early audience accounts describe emerging from the theater as if waking from a deep, slow dream. Movements felt heavier, colors seemed muted, and sounds in the real world carried a distant, echoing quality. Some viewers said the film's pacing had worked its way into their internal rhythms, making them walk, speak, or even think more slowly for hours afterward. Many described an unsettling form of emotional déjà vu, not tied to specific scenes, but to moods: humid corridors, abandoned rooms, distant industrial hums. These sensations surfaced unexpectedly in daily life, prompting fleeting memories that didn't belong to personal experience. Psychologists proposed that Tarkovsky's long takes act like contemplative triggers, allowing hidden memories to surface, but this didn't explain why so many people experienced dreamlike distortions and temporal drift. The digital restoration, though visually stunning, seemed to dissolve the ineffable quality that sparked these reactions. The original prints reportedly carried slight exposure, breathing, and subtle color instability that created the film's trademark living texture. Once stabilized for modern formats, the film felt more visually coherent but less hypnotic. Fans who remembered early screenings insisted that something essential had been lost. The zone no longer felt alive in the same way. Archivists whispered about chemical inconsistencies in the damaged film stock that contributed to its shifting tones. Tarkovsky himself once remarked that the film's texture was unrepeatable, a statement that only deepened the mystery. For those who witnessed Stalker in its rawest form, the movie seemed less like a narrative and more like an incantation, one that briefly bent their perception, tugging them toward a quiet, lingering strangeness long after they stepped back into the ordinary world. 2. 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. From its earliest release, 2001, A Space Odyssey was associated with reports of unusual perceptual reactions. Viewers described the Stargate sequence not merely as visually overwhelming, but as physically intrusive, an experience that pushed into their senses rather than passing through them. Many said they felt suspended during the scene, as if time had dropped away entirely. A few claimed that after the lights rose, they struggled to recall the order of images, remembering instead a sensation of motion, color, and sound fused into a single, overwhelming impression. Outside the theater, some viewers reported strange after effects, glowing contours around bright objects, faint geometric patterns lingering behind their eyelids, or a subtle pulsing sensation when listening to ambient noise. Others recalled hearing echoes of the Ligeti score, particularly the choral clusters, as if the harmonies were imprinted onto silence itself. These experiences varied in duration but were so common that theaters in the late 60 seconds quietly cautioned audiences about the film's intensity. Digital restorations, though visually immaculate, seemed to smooth out whatever once produced these sensations. The color transitions became cleaner, the projection steady, and the audio refined. Many fans of the original 70mm screenings insisted that the early prints had light fluctuations and exposure irregularities that heightened the hypnotic effect of the Stargate sequence. Without them, the film remained powerful, but no longer carried the same perceptual weight. Long-standing speculation suggests that Kubrick intentionally pushed the optical processes to their limits, creating subtle instabilities that amplified the immersive effect. Archivists deny any deliberate intention, but acknowledge that the demanding nature of the visuals produced unpredictable artifacts. To those who saw the film in its earliest form, 2001 wasn't just a cinematic journey, it was a sensory threshold. For a brief window, reality felt pliable, and the mind lingered between awe and disorientation, unsure whether it had witnessed a film or undergone a transformation. 3. Solaris, 1972. Early viewers of Solaris often described leaving the theater with a strange emotional aftertaste, a softness in their thoughts, as if someone had pressed gently against their memories. The film's slow, drifting camera movements and muted palette seemed to settle into the subconscious rather than the intellect. Many said that time inside the film felt elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made certain scenes feel suspended, almost dreamlike. Hours later, these same viewers recalled walking through ordinary rooms only to feel an inexplicable familiarity, as if they were retracing steps from a dream they didn't remember having. Some of the most striking testimonials involved memory bleed-through. People described recalling places from their childhood after watching the film, details they had long forgotten. Others claimed they felt emotional echoes triggered by sounds or textures that bore no direct relationship to their lives. Psychologists argued that Tarkovsky's associative editing builds intuitive connections, but the consistency and intensity of these reports went well beyond typical cinematic influence. With the arrival of high-definition restorations, these reactions diminished noticeably. The crisp, stable image presented a clean version of Solaris, beautiful but less enveloping. Fans who had experienced older screenings noted that the theatrical prints contained imperfections, grain fluctuations, color breathing, and soft focus shifts that created a subtle shimmering effect. This organic instability, they believed, encouraged the mind to drift into a semi-hypnotic state. Once removed, the film felt more grounded, less otherworldly. A rumor persisted among archivists that the original film stock used for Solaris had slight chemical imbalances, producing unpredictable textures that contributed to its haunting aura. Though unproven, the idea resonated with many who remembered the earlier version. For those viewers, Solaris didn't just tell a story about memory, grief, and human consciousness. It temporarily reshaped the internal landscape of the mind, leaving behind a quiet resonance that felt less like recollection and more like a lingering presence. 4. THX 11381971. From its debut, THX 1138 created a unique category of audience response centered around sensory deprivation. The stark white voids, hollow acoustics, and rigid industrial environments produced an uncanny numbness in viewers. Many described feeling emotionally muted for a short time after the film, as though their senses had been drained by the sterile world on screen. A few noted that bright surfaces in the real world appeared overly luminous, echoing the film's clinical glare. Temporal distortion also became a frequent observation. The film's abrupt switches between silence and mechanical noise created a rhythm that disrupted viewers' internal pacing. Some people believed the film ended far sooner than expected, while others insisted they lost track of key transitions, only realizing this when discussing the story afterward. These lapses weren't tied to confusion. Rather, viewers felt as though segments of the film had been skipped in their minds. However, the arrival of later remastered editions softened these psychological effects. The digital transfer introduced consistency, stable lighting, sharper shadows, refined audio that diminished the disorienting irregularities of the early prints. Fans who experienced older screenings argued that the grain fluctuations, occasional sound dropouts, and uneven exposures played an essential role in generating the sense of sensory dislocation. There were also rumors, never officially acknowledged, that Lucas experimented with layered audio frequencies designed to reflect the oppressive mental state of the characters. Whether deliberate or accidental, these elements seemed to amplify the film's psychological impact. For those who saw THX 1138 inches, its earliest form, the movie briefly imposed its dystopian numbness onto reality. They didn't just watch a controlled society, they felt a temporary narrowing of their own perception, as if the film had quietly rewritten how they sensed space and time. 5. The Man Who Fell to Earth 1976. When The Man Who Fell to Earth first appeared on screens, reports emerged of viewers leaving the theater with an unsettling sense of detachment from their surroundings. Many described a lingering dislocation, as though familiar rooms and streets felt slightly hollow or emotionally distant. The film's fragmented editing and abrupt tonal shifts seemed to fracture the flow of perception, leaving audiences temporarily out of sync with real-world rhythms. Some said that everyday reflections, mirrors, windows, even polished metal triggered brief waves of déjà vu, reminiscent of Bowie's Alien Gaze. Memory discrepancies became a recurring theme in early discussions. Viewers swore they recalled scenes framed differently, props positioned elsewhere, or gestures that felt altered on later viewings. These disagreements were too frequent to dismiss as simple misremembering, especially among those who saw the film multiple times in its initial run. Many believed the film was intentionally structured to confuse spatial and emotional continuity. The film's later digital restorations brought clarity but also erased something intangible. The newer versions presented smooth lighting, corrected color balances, and precise sound qualities that seemed to ground the imagery rather than unmoor it. Fans who remembered the original reels insisted that unstable exposures and analog irregularities created a subtle strobing effect, intensifying the film's otherworldly atmosphere. Without those imperfections, the film felt more coherent but less haunting. Unverified stories circulated claiming Nicholas Roeg toyed with micro-variations in exposure to evoke subtle audience discomfort. While never confirmed, the persistence of such rumors reflects the intensity of early reactions. To those who witnessed The Man Who Fell to Earth before its restoration, the film didn't just depict alienation, it induced it. For a brief window of time, viewers felt like outsiders in their own world, momentarily tuned to a frequency not meant for human perception. 6. Altered States 1980. Early viewers of Altered States often described the film as something that affected the body as much as the mind. During the sensory deprivation sequences, many reported a tingling sensation in their arms or a tightening in their chest, as though the room's air pressure had shifted. Others felt a drifting sensation, an internal floating that briefly blurred the distinction between their own thoughts and the swirling hallucinations on screen. Several people said that standing up after the film made them momentarily dizzy, as if gravity had subtly recalibrated during the viewing. The film's abrupt rhythm changes, flashes of psychedelic imagery followed by sudden silence, contributed to uncanny memory lapses. Viewers described coming to mid-scene without recalling how the previous moment ended. Projectionists from the original run even mentioned that audiences looked disoriented when the lights came up, blinking as if waking from a collective trance. When Altered States reached its polished digital releases, these accounts faded. The remastered visuals removed the unstable flicker and the soft, uneven glow that once surrounded the hallucination sequences. The sound mix became cleaner, losing the unpredictable low-frequency surges remembered by those who saw the film decades earlier. Fans noted that the restored version felt impressive but lacked the visceral, destabilizing power of the analog prints. Some whispered anecdotes from the post-production team claimed that early editing experiments included unconventional frame blending, intended to mimic dissociation. Although later abandoned, remnants of the technique may have survived in the theatrical cut, only to be evened out in later restorations. For those who saw the movie during its earliest showings, Altered States seemed to induce a brief slipping of identity, a momentary sense that the mind was expanding outward, testing its edges. before retreating back into stability once the film ended. 7. Phase 4, 1974. The earliest audience reactions to Phase 4 often described a subtle but pervasive alteration of perception. Viewers reported that after leaving the theater, ordinary patterns in the environment, cracks in pavement, shadows across walls, arrangements of objects appeared unusually organized, as though reality were aligning itself into hidden geometries. Some even felt watched, not by people, but by patterns themselves, as if the world were quietly observing them in return. The film's extensive use of macro photography contributed to these responses. Extreme close-ups of ants, symmetrical formations, and sterile scientific environments created a hypnotic rhythm that audiences said lingered long after the film ended. Several viewers described seeing fleeting motions in their peripheral vision, tiny flickers that vanished the moment they turned to look. Psychologists suggested this could be an afterimage effect, but viewers insisted the sensation felt active, not residual. The restored version of Phase 4 revealed a noticeably cleaner presentation. The grain was uniform, the lighting stable, and the once chaotic textures subdued. This clarity came at a cost. The spellbinding irregularities of the early prints, unexpected bursts of brightness, uneven exposure, and organic flicker were gone. Fans of the original screenings argued that these imperfections created a subliminal tension, a sense that the boundaries of perception were thinning. Rumors grew around the suppressed original ending, a surreal montage of shapes and colors meant to represent a new evolutionary step. Some saw it at limited screenings and claimed it induced a brief dissociative sensation, as if their minds were adjusting to a different perceptual framework. The ending resurfaced decades later, but by then, the raw qualities that once made it so intense had been refined away. For those who experienced Phase 4 in its most unfiltered form, the film felt like an invitation to notice patterns, normally ignored patterns that, once seen, were difficult to unsee. 8. Videodrome 1983. Early discussions around Videodrome rarely centered on the storyline alone. Instead, viewers described strange sensory echoes that followed them out of the theater. Some reported that television screens in their homes appeared subtly distorted edges curving inward, static humming more prominently, or faint ripples fluttering across the glass. Others claimed they felt a strange tension in dark rooms, as if the shadows were vibrating in response to unspoken frequencies. These sensations typically lasted only a few hours, yet were vivid enough that many remembered them years later. A significant number of viewers also mentioned auditory aftereffects. They described faint crackles or modulated tones layered beneath everyday sounds, resembling the unsettling signal patterns in the film. A few insisted that whispers in the movie's static sequences continued to echo in memory with unnatural persistence. Archivists later noted that certain early prints had inconsistent audio tracks due to low-budget post-production, potentially introducing subtle anomalies that contributed to these reactions. With the film's arrival on DVD and Blu-ray, such experiences became rare. The digital versions presented a more stable image, no flickering exposure, no mechanical inconsistencies, no unpredictable analog textures. Fans who remembered the earlier releases felt that something essential had been polished away. They argued that the breathing screen effect many recalled might have arisen from micro-distortions in older projection systems, imperfections that accidentally amplified the film's themes of corrupted broadcast signals. There were also whispers, completely unverified, that Cronenberg's team experimented with layered flicker effects designed to create subconscious unease but abandoned them late in production. Whether these techniques ever made it into early prints remains unknown. To the viewers who experienced those raw versions, Videodrome felt less like a commentary on media consumption and more like an intrusion, an audiovisual presence that seemed determined to linger in the mind after the film itself was gone. 9. The Fountain, 2006. When The Fountain first appeared in theaters, viewers described an unusual stillness settling over them, an inward pull that made the film feel less like a narrative and more like a meditation. Many said the film's golden hues and spiraling movements created a sensation of drifting, as though the boundaries of time were loosening. Some insisted they momentarily lost track of where they were during certain transitions, waking into the next scene with the sense that entire instants had slipped past unnoticed. Reports soon emerged of dreams shaped by the film's visual tone. People described floating through luminous voids, seeing glowing particles suspended in darkness, or encountering tree-like silhouettes that felt deeply familiar despite never appearing in their lives. These dreams, according to several accounts, continued for days. A few viewers even said they felt emotional aftershocks, moments of inexplicable longing, or déjà vu triggered by light reflecting off windows or by fleeting silhouettes of branches at dusk. Once the film transitioned to Blu-ray, however, these experiences faded almost entirely. The remastered version, though visually gorgeous, lacked the gentle blur and soft blooming light that defined early theatrical prints. The enhanced clarity seemed to anchor the imagery more firmly in reality, removing the intangible softness that once encouraged viewers to slip into altered states. Some fans believed that the original projection materials created fluctuating highlights and slight color instability, producing a hypnotic effect that simply couldn't be replicated digitally. Rumors circulated among visual effects staff that early test composites used non-standard blending techniques, creating textures that breathed subtly when projected. These anomalies may have been corrected during restoration, unintentionally erasing what made the film feel so dreamlike. For those who saw the fountain in its earliest form, the experience felt like touching the edge of something timeless, a cinematic loop that left emotional footprints long after its images disappeared. 10. Upstream Color, 2013. During its initial festival circuit, Upstream Color left viewers with an unusual consensus. They remembered emotions far more vividly than scenes. Many described emerging from the theater with the distinct impression that their memory had been gently scrambled. Whole sections of the story felt missing, or fused together in ways that didn't align when compared with later viewings. It wasn't confusion, more like an involuntary drift, a soft blankness in the mind where sequences should have been. This effect was reinforced by the film's rhythmic flow. Its overlapping sound bridges, quiet motifs, and elliptical edits acted less like narrative devices and more like subconscious cues. Several people said they heard ambient sounds from the film, rustling leaves, distant thumps, soft aquatic tones, long after leaving the auditorium, especially in quiet environments. Others reported dreaming in the film's sensory language, flashes of blue light, soil being disturbed, hands moving in slow synchronization. Yet these peculiar reactions diminished once the Blu-ray emerged. The later transfer appeared clearer and more structurally legible, with transitions that felt smoother and less trance-inducing. The audio mix, noticeably cleaner, lacked the subtle irregularities audiences recalled from early screenings. Fans of the theatrical cut argued that the imperfections, grain fluctuations, uneven sound textures, and inconsistent lighting were essential to the film's immersive disorientation. Industry rumors hinted that early edits involved experimental layering techniques that accidentally produced phase cancellations in key frequencies, subtly destabilizing perception. If so, the remastered version corrected these issues, unintentionally removing the film's uncanny psychological residue. To the viewers who experienced those first showings, Upstream Color felt like it briefly rearranged the boundaries between memory and sensation. They didn't just watch the story, they absorbed it, and pieces of themselves seemed to shift in response. 11. Annihilation, 2018. From its earliest theatrical showings, Annihilation generated reports that sounded less like film criticism and more like accounts of altered sensory processing. Many viewers said that during scenes inside the shimmer, their sense of depth and color subtly shifted. The refracted light, soft-edged distortions, and low-frequency pulses created a feeling that the theater itself was bending, almost breathing. A few described a sensation similar to pressure changes in an airplane cabin, an internal adjustment they couldn't quite place. Some of the most unusual testimonies came from viewers who experienced lingering visual impressions afterward. They claimed reflections appeared too bright, or that surfaces seemed to blend colors in unusual ways. Light shimmering across cars, puddles, or mirrors would trigger brief flashes reminiscent of the film's mutating landscapes. Others said their dreams adopted the shimmer's strange logic, environments merging, sounds echoing in unfamiliar patterns, or moments looping slightly out of sequence. Yet these experiences sharply declined once the film reached home media. The Blu-ray, though stunning, had a more controlled look. Colors were crisp rather than blooming, and the resonant sound design was balanced more evenly. Viewers revisiting the film noted that the disorientation they remembered simply wasn't there. Some suspected the theatrical projectors exaggerated certain lighting effects, while others believed the original sound mix contained low-end anomalies removed in later mastering. A quiet rumor circulated among post-production staff, claiming that early mixing tests unintentionally produced overlapping frequencies that created a mild internal vibration, barely perceptible, but powerful enough to unsettle spatial awareness. Whether accident or artifact, the effect did not survive the refinement of digital restoration. For those who encountered Annihilation during its first run, the shimmer wasn't just a fictional phenomenon. It seemed to briefly replicate itself in the real world, leaving audiences uncertain whether the distortions they experienced were optical illusions or subtle echoes of something their minds weren't meant to interpret. 12. Coherence, 2013. When Coherence first circulated in small festival screenings, early viewers consistently reported an uncanny sensation that went beyond confusion. Many felt as though the film was subtly rearranging itself in their memory. They described recalling dialogue differently, sensing pauses that didn't seem to exist on rewatch, or remembering props positioned in ways that contradicted later viewings. The film's improvised structure and jittery handheld movement contributed to this effect. But audiences insisted the sensation felt deeper, almost like their recollections were being overwritten while they watched. A number of people described a strange destabilization after stepping outside. Street layouts felt slightly altered, or familiar spaces seemed shifted by a few feet. One viewer claimed that as he drove home, the route seemed both familiar and mildly foreign, like a path he'd traveled in a dream rather than real life. Glow sticks, a central motif in the film, reportedly triggered faint déjà vu in the days following, despite having no personal connection to them. When Coherence was later released on Blu-ray with clearer audio and more polished visuals, these perceptual oddities largely vanished. Fans revisiting the film found it engaging but no longer disorienting. The ambient noise, once murky and inconsistent, had been cleaned. The lighting stabilized, the grain softened. Whatever unstable elements influenced early audiences appeared to have been smoothed away. Some speculated that the low-budget nature of the original shoot resulted in fluctuating audio levels and uneven lighting that subconsciously disrupted spatial memory. Others believed the handheld camera, when compressed into early digital formats, produced micro-stutters that subtly unsettled viewers. None of these theories fully explain why so many people described such similar distortions. To those who encountered those raw early versions, Coherence briefly blurred the line between narrative uncertainty and personal perception, creating the eerie impression that the film's fractured realities had reached outward and brushed against their own. 13. Primer, 2004. Primer has long been known for its intellectual density, but early audiences reported something stranger than confusion, an impression that the film's structure disrupted their internal perception of time. Some viewers claimed they lost track of entire stretches of the narrative, only to regain awareness during quiet, transitional moments. Others experienced a peculiar doubling effect, recalling conversations they believed had occurred twice, or sensing that certain scenes had shifted positions between viewings. These weren't simple continuity misunderstandings. Engineers and mathematicians, who were presumably best equipped to follow the branching timelines, also described unusual reactions. A few insisted they felt mentally compressed, as if their thoughts were being forced through a narrow conceptual corridor. Some viewers reported stepping out of theaters with the sense that real time had accelerated or slowed in subtle but noticeable ways. By the time Primer reached DVD and eventually high-definition platforms, these reactions had mostly disappeared. Fans noted that the film felt more stable, more predictable, and far easier to follow. The audio mix in particular seemed clearer, lacking the uneven ambient textures remembered from early screenings. Some theorized that the original exhibition prints carried low-level imperfections, room tone fluctuations, minor sync inconsistencies that contributed to the feeling of temporal instability. Rumors persisted that the production's constrained budget resulted in irregular frame blending or hasty splicing, unintentionally creating micro-jumps in motion that encouraged viewers to fill gaps subconsciously. Later remastering likely corrected these quirks, smoothing out the film's once fractured rhythm. To those who encountered the earliest version, Primer felt like more than a puzzle box narrative. It seemed to momentarily infect perception with the very instability it depicted, leaving viewers unsure whether the distortions came from the film or from themselves. 14. Beyond the Black Rainbow, 2010. When Beyond the Black Rainbow began circulating, audiences described an immediate pressure, an atmospheric weight that settled over them before they even understood the story unfolding. The deep synth drones, slow tracking shots, and oppressive red light created a psychological environment that didn't merely disturb, it enveloped. Several viewers insisted that time behaved strangely during the film. Some believed the runtime had doubled. Others swore it ended faster than expected, as though the pacing folded inward on itself. Many viewers reported visual distortions afterward, faint phantom colors clinging to the edges of objects, or subtle shifts in luminance when transitioning between bright and dark spaces. Some claimed that their depth perception briefly felt unreliable, with hallways appearing narrower or rooms seeming flatter than usual. Others described hearing tonal vibrations in quiet environments, soft, mechanical hums almost identical to the film's ambient frequencies. These effects reportedly occurred only after early screenings and vanished in later home releases. The Blu-ray version, clean and methodical, lacked the raw, abrasive textures of the original prints. Projectionists who worked during the first run suggested that slight inconsistencies in bulb intensity and aging film stock produced a throbbing quality in the color bands, making the visuals feel alive. Once digitized, those fluctuations disappeared, creating a more stable but less immersive experience. Rumors circulated that Panos Cosmatos experimented with unconventional lighting rigs that produced micro-flickers too subtle for the eye to detect directly but capable of affecting mood or spatial awareness. The production team never confirmed this, but early reviewers often used phrases like subconscious vertigo or dream state pacing, hinting that something beneath the surface was at work. For those who witnessed the film before it was refined, Beyond the Black Rainbow seemed less like a narrative and more like an altered environment, one that briefly coaxed the mind into perceiving reality through a tinted, pulsating filter. 15. Enter the Void, 2009. Early audiences of Enter the Void frequently described the film not as something they watched, but as something they entered. Reports from initial screenings mentioned an uncanny sensation similar to drifting and inner floating that persisted even after viewers returned to normal light. Many said the film's first-person perspective created a strange dissociation, as though their awareness had slipped sideways and had trouble settling back into their bodies. Some even claimed they experienced soft pulses of neon light behind closed eyelids for days, matching the film's hypnotic Tokyo glow. Dreams became the most common theme in testimonies. People recalled reappearing in long, spiraling corridors or hovering above unfamiliar apartments, repeating the camera's ethereal movements. Others said they saw the same shifting colors but couldn't place them within any cinematic context, suggesting the imagery had blurred into something more personal. Those who revisited the film later argued that these dream episodes faded only after newer digital releases softened the harshest contrasts and smoothed out the strobing transitions. Strangely, many viewers reported that certain scenes seemed to vanish when watching re-released versions, moments they remembered vividly, yet could not locate again. Small gestures, a sound cue, a hallway shape that once felt overwhelming gone without explanation. Some believed their memories had distorted, others insisted the original theatrical cut carried a rawness that imprinted far more intensely than the cleaned-up versions. A rumor circulated among projectionists that early digital prints were assembled from incomplete or partially corrupted files, resulting in unstable light transitions that amplified the film's unmoored atmosphere. Whether this is true remains uncertain, but many who saw those first showings maintain the same claim. Enter the Void once behaved more like an altered state than a movie, and its later revisions, though visually pristine, no longer possess the same ability to slip beneath consciousness. Bonus fact: the Kirlian frequency, 2017 present. Before it became a cult phenomenon, the earliest viewers of the Kirlian frequency whispered about a peculiar sensation they called the after signal. Unlike typical horror or sci-fi reactions, this wasn't fear or adrenaline, it was a lingering tonal presence, as though the show continued broadcasting even after the screen turned black. Some viewers reported hearing faint hums late at night, soft modulated vibrations that resembled the eerie soundscape of the series. Others described seeing brief flashes of neon blues and purples in their peripheral vision, colors that vanished the moment they turned their head. What made the phenomenon especially strange was that many people claimed episodes felt different when revisited. Scenes seemed paced differently, lines of dialogue felt altered, and transitions they remembered vividly were nowhere to be found. Yet every archived version across fan recordings, early uploads, and later streaming releases matched perfectly. Some viewers wondered whether their recollections had been distorted by mood or suggestion. Others believed something subtler was happening, that the show somehow rewired the way memory handled atmospheric details. When the series moved to major streaming platforms, these reactions diminished almost instantly. Improved resolution and stabilized audio removed many of the murky textures and unstable tones that early viewers associated with the after signal, but a subset of fans insisted the first uploads contained irregularities, color banding, audio flutter, micro glitches that created a liminal quality impossible to replicate. One of the creators once hinted in an interview that some episodes existed only briefly. A comment never clarified. Whether this referred to drafts, test uploads, or something stranger remains unknown to those who encountered the earliest iterations. The Kirlian frequency never felt like a simple series. It behaved like a transmission, one that seemed to seep into quiet rooms, echo inside memory, and convince viewers that something out there was still speaking to them long after the episode had ended. If any of these films have ever left you sensing echoes long after the screen went dark, strange shifts in mood, flickers of déjà vu, or moments where the world felt slightly misaligned, you're not imagining things. Countless viewers across decades have quietly shared similar stories, hinting that some movies don't just entertain, they leave impressions that move beneath conscious thought. If you've ever walked away from a film feeling changed in a way you couldn't explain, share your experience below. Someone else might recognize it. And if you want us to continue opening files like these, records of cinematic anomalies whispered about but rarely examined, subscribe, leave a sign, and stay close. There are more distortions waiting.